Horripilating Presence is the debut full-length album from Void Witch. This is a Texas-based death doom metal band, and one that sticks to generally a more of a traditional style of death doom where there are doom metal riffs, there is death metal applied to them, and there are movements throughout this thing which are much more in the style of 90s death doom metal without any of the thrashing Celtic Frost kind of affect. So this is more in the realm of early Hooded Menace or bands like nowadays like Temple of Void and Solothus, who might add keyboards here and there or a little bit of gothic stuff here and there, but for the most part, pretty straightforward death metal meshed with death doom riffs, or death metal riffs, if you will. And here, this band is somewhat melodic too, in their own way. I wouldn't say that this fully goes into the realm of British death doom at all, but more so in maybe the early Paradise Lost, but maybe the more traditional doom-oriented bands like God Forsaken, who were maybe a little bit heavy rock inspired. They had a little bit of that going on in their sound. So yes, you could just say this sounds a bit like a certain era of Hooded Menace with a little touch of that Paradise Lost in there too, just as records like Ossuarium, Silhouettes, Unhallowed had. Overall, they're kind of doing their own thing a little bit, and we'll check that out here in a clip just to get a sense for the amount of detail, time, and effort they put into this record to make sure every second of it is interesting, heavy, and somewhat unique. So just after the first song on this album makes this big first impression, and it seems like this record is going to be a big personality, and there's a bunch of solos flying off. See, these guys can really play. You can tell they've mapped out every note of those solos, and it all sounds really great on that first song. And then we hit the second song, and it's this shorter piece that sounds like it's off the fourth Carcass record or something like that. It's kind of a death and roll kind of thing, and the leads will lead you there right away if you're a fan of Bill Steer's work in the mid 90s, like I say here. It's a switch up that they do, which is, it's kind of like their Paranoid moment. It's kind of the one song that doesn't really fit, but is probably pretty catchy. It kind of works, but it strays and confuses the focus of this record, which is otherwise mostly just death doom and death metal in general. In fact, I wouldn't say doom is so prominent that it needs to be fully there, but they do hit extremes for long periods of times on this record that do feel like early United States death doom metal. And I mentioned bands like Celestial Season and Hooded Menace because there is a little bit of all of that happening on here. There is kind of a 90s feeling to parts of it. But other parts, it seems like they're stretching out into other influences. At their age, obviously, they probably grew up with grunge and whatnot. And there are a couple of moments on here where it does feel like they're hitting upon really their roots rather than the roots of death doom metal. So over time, I think there's a point where they'll kind of break away from just sounding old school or just like death doom and continue to work on doing their own thing. And I think that's my biggest criticism of this record overall, is that it does feel like they're holding back and trying just to fit into this box for this first record to make sure people get the point of what kind of where they're basing their general shared interest. And it was they've obviously focused on this as a side project. It's kind of the thing that they do in between their real life. And so it's a miraculous feat in that sense that it all came together in such a cohesive, well-stated package with a really great album art and all that. I think it all comes together perfectly in that sense. But the sense of self that we get from this record is really in the periphery. It's in the extras they put on here, and they could show a much bigger personality, and they do in some songs, like the second one on this record. But it feels like they're holding back. It feels like they're not quite giving you all of themselves on this record. And as weird as that might be, it might actually be more interesting and in the long run. So I like what this record is doing. I think the style is very much for me. I do like records in this style, but I wouldn't say it's absolute perfection. I think there's obviously more they could do with it, but otherwise really interesting album art, unique in its presentation, and fine production values. There's a lot to like about this record, including its authorship. So check it out if you will. It released on July 26th, and go ahead and read my review for more details on what I thought and felt about the album.